Welcome, everyone. We're glad you joined us. We are just getting started. I can see participants joining as I'm speaking, and we're expecting a good crowd. There's already a couple hundred folks, so we're just going to wait a moment as others log in. I'm Jerry Jones. I'm with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. We're glad you're here. Welcome to those who are just joining. We are about to start our webinar. We're very glad that you joined us. We're expecting a good crowd. Feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves to one another. And I'm just going to give it another 30 seconds or so. I can see the attendees are still coming in, and then we'll jump into the webinar. Welcome to those who are joining. We are about to start our webinar. I'm Jerry Jones with the National Alliance, and folks are still joining at a rapid clip. So we're just going to wait another few seconds. Thanks to everyone who was here at the top of the hour. We're excited to get into the discussion, but we're going to wait just a few more seconds as others join. Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. I'm Jerry Jones with the National Alliance. This is a webinar about the voices of people with lived experience in the continuum of care process and really all the programs, policies, decisions, advocacy that happen around homelessness in America. The title of this webinar, one of my favorite quotes in organizing on these issues, is "Nothing about us without us," and the importance of both recognizing the leadership and creating the space for people who have experienced homelessness firsthand to be involved. Next slide, please. So again, I'm Jerry Jones. I did want to go over just a few quick housekeeping items before we dive in. Next slide. So as I think probably everyone knows, this is the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and we are very excited to have such participation. We have hundreds of folks who have joined this webinar. It's part of a series of webinars that we'll be doing on different aspects of the notice of funding opportunity that's coming out. As we probably all know from joining similar events, there are two ways you can interact. You can chat with one another with a chat button, and then there will be Q&A with our panelists after we've had sort of a moderated discussion. So if you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A button, not the chat button. We won't see your questions in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, so that's often a question that gets asked in the Q&A box. It will be on our website shortly, along with these slides. And so come back to the endhomelessness.org website to watch it again if you'd like. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you can see there's a description for some of the upcoming webinars and presentations we'll be making about the NOFO. And there are, as you may have noticed, 2 NOFOs this year. And so this is a great way to get ready as if you're a provider, if you're a system leader, or in other ways tracking federal homelessness spending. And you get mail from us or the newsletters once a week, you will see other opportunities to participate in these kinds of webinars. So this is one in a series. We've done 2 others before this, and they are going to be on our website as well. Next slide. And I won't read this to you, but this describes some of the reasons why we think it's so important to have these resources and this kind of a discussion with our field partners and policy advocates and others who are working on making the homeless system stronger and more responsive and better resourced. Next slide, please. And then we're about to begin. So I want to introduce our panel briefly. And it's a real treat to have these four individuals who are so immersed in the role of lived experience with homeless advocacy. I think it's going to be a great discussion. Reba Stevens is a member of the Los Angeles Continuum of Care Board, and she represents the voices of the underserved. Also on the SPA 6 Homeless Coalition, Reba has used her lived experience as a homeless individual for 21 years to advocate for lasting solutions to homelessness and to represent the voices of lived expertise in many forums. Her goal is to ensure that mental health and substance abuse screenings and treatment are funded, accessible, and embedded in all the facets of service delivery for people experiencing homelessness, as well as for folks who are recently housed after being homeless. Suzette Shaw is a Skid Row resident for almost 10 years. She serves on the Alliance's Consumer Advisory Board. She writes, talks, and advocates from a woman's perspective. My favorite quote from Suzette is that we can no longer talk about equality and empowerment while enforcing inequities. And we're very glad to have Reba and Suzette from Los Angeles with us. Bill Higgins is an at-large officer with the lived experience for Maine's COC board. He is executive director of Homeless Advocacy for All, which is working to increase lived experience involvement. Bill also serves as the membership committee vice chair and as a board member for the National Coalition for the Homeless, as well as also serving on the Alliance's Consumer Advisory Board. Chris O'Hare is the vice chair of the Suburban Cook County Continuum of Care. He co-chairs the Lived Experience Commission for the Chicago COC as well. He's on the facilitation committee of CHARGE, the Chicago Homelessness and Health Response Group for Equity. And he also sits on IMPACT, a mental health statewide commission. So with that, I'll ask my colleague Rachel to advance to the next slide, and then we will dive into the discussion. Thank you all again on our panel for spending some time to talk to us about your advice to continuums of care and providers and government officials and all the others who have joined us about how to involve, listen to, and take advantage of the expertise of people with lived experience in the continuum of care programs. So I'll start simply by asking each of you how you got involved. I'll start with you, Bill. You're on the statewide continuum of care. How did you find yourself involved in that board, and how does that board make use of the input of people with lived experience?
I started as an advocate with Homeless Voices for Justice for Provo Street, and that was about 8 years ago. And then for the last 6 years, I participated with the Maine COC. It's great to be able to be involved with individuals that provide the services. And I see in my role as a board member and now the lived experience officer to provide oversight to how the services are done to ensure that the people are involved. I recruited another individual to be joined to join the COC board as well this year. So thank you.
I know that you are by nature a connector. You have helped other people with lived experience join the things I know you and I are both involved in, and so that's a key role to kind of open doors and make introductions that way.
Yeah, I enjoy involvement with other COCs as well, just to be able to, with the way we're meeting now electronically, people can participate and share best practices and learn best practices among them. We shouldn't compete against each other. We need to work together and lift all boats. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Suzette, I want to go to you. I know you have been involved on the Continuum of Care board in Los Angeles with LAHSA. You're active in the downtown, the LA Providers Collaborative in Skid Row. Tell us a little bit about how you became involved, especially in the COC process and with LAHSA in Los Angeles, and how that organization involves people with lived experience.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And it's great to be on this panel with all of you. You know, as I told a journalist yesterday over the phone, I did not come to Skid Row to be an advocate. I can't even say that I even really knew or understood what that word meant at the time. It's, as I oftentimes say that, you know, my trials continually perpetuated my trials continually perpetuated what I was going through, the retreating of trauma. Then the trials really, really perpetuated then the advocacy and the platform that I have today. So I became involved with LAHSA's Continuum of Care Board. I'm not even exactly sure how many years now I've been on a Continuum of Care Board, maybe like 4 or 5 years. I have been the last couple of years the vice chair, as I am today, of the Continuum of Care Board at LAHSA. I believe I may have initially became engaged with the Lived Experience Advisory Board at LAHSA, but really I just found myself compelled to really go into spaces as I was just really trying to unpack what I was going through, what I was seeing around me, and really just trying to make sense of it all. And just, you know, my spirit just told me this isn't right. Something isn't right here. Things are not driving. Things are not connecting. What the heck is going on? And that's really what's really fueled over a course of time, which I'm happy to go into over the course of the next, you know, hour or so. The other work that I've done from here in Skid Row, from Downtown Women's Action Coalition with LA Can, to Downtown Women's Center, where I first phoned my sister and where I was a missing person and spent almost every single day the first few years of my journey here in Skid Row, where I would go every single morning and, you know, make breakfast, oatmeal for the women, scrub pots and pans, clean tables, and all that jazz. Like it's been a long journey. It's not just a caveat of a one or another thing. It's not just a black and white. It's a very complex at large of really how the continuation of being compelled to really be involved with this advocacy.
Thank you, Suzette. Let me go to you next, Chris. You are involved in 2 continuums of care, the suburban Cook County COC as well as the Chicago COC. Tell us a little bit about how you became involved and any reflections on how those 2 continuums of care involve people with lived experience.
Well, yes, thank you. I first got involved with the Chicago Continuum of Care. I want to say back in 2014. I started attending, they call them planning council meetings back then. Not, they didn't call them COC board meetings, not at least not Chicago Continuum of Care. And they were working on a 10-year plan to end homelessness. And I started to attend there, and I knew a few other individuals, and they started plugging me into the right positions, letting me know to where I could go because I had lived experience. I was formerly homeless. I was in a shelter, and I was also on the street. Also, sometimes even stayed what you would consider not inhabitable locations. But so I was there for a while. Then I joined Lived Experience Commission, which is made up of people that are literally homeless, or currently, or were homeless, or at risk of being homeless. So it's getting pretty open, and you have to attend so many meetings before they can vote. You know, it's like 3 meetings, and then they decide whether or not if you want to be a member or not. I started to attend some meetings on my own, and then started to take on more responsibilities as time went on. I've co-chaired some committees and like point in time ranking of decisions that have gone to for HUD approval for the NOFA, a collaborative applicant subcommittee that I sit on now, which evaluates our collaborative applicant of our continuum of care, which happens to be all Chicago, and then some various other committees. we actually have an employment committee, which is actually pretty nice. I don't see that in every continuum of care. So it touches on not only getting people trained and ready for work, but it also looks at transportation issues that you need, people need to get there, and also benefits for some people that might need their SSI, SSDI, otherwise known as SOAR services.
Yeah.
And with Suburban Cook, I kind of knew some of the people there, and they have a membership that is, some people are at large, which is what I am, but I just happen to be of lived experience. And then they have regions, a north, a south, and a west. And so they realize they need to have Chicago input for their continuum. Otherwise, you're really missing huge parts of what's going on within your continuum of care.
Yeah.
And that way they're actually able to, and they even have a pretty decent working dialogue with the Chicago continuum of care as well. So they realize that they have homeless folks that sometimes go from one COC to the other. Right, that way you're not, because some people can go inactive and coordinate entry lists, and then they're tracking them on HMIS, but this way you lose less folks and people just don't drift off into the ether, if you will. And I will say, William, I have witnessed you on, I think, at least one or two of board meetings, and I've been also known to do that, especially with things being virtual. I've attended a couple Will County meetings and DuPage County meetings. So the time that you don't, even though you might be busier than ever having more meetings, the fact that you don't have to physically go to them, it's a prime time to really engage other folks, because otherwise trying to make travel plans to do that would probably take half your day. But
Thank you,
sorry,
Chris.
I didn't mean to be that long-winded, Jerry.
No, that's fine. We're going to get into some of these issues, and it's I think what's true for this group is each of you is motivated and committed to engagement, and so you're active in so many things as a reflection of just that passion. One question, not to answer now, but I would love to get your reflections on how continuums can reach out to folks who may not otherwise be so proactive in making their voices heard. But let me turn to you, Reba, because in living in Los Angeles for 5 years, I saw you at meetings and in public comment sessions before I got to know you. You have been a vocal champion for people with lived experience for more than 2 decades now. And so I'd love to hear, how did you then find your way to the LA Continuum of Care Board? And what's your sense of how that board makes use of the expertise of people who know homelessness firsthand?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to participate here today and amongst my peers. So thank you. So how I came to be a part of the Care Board, it's very interesting. I got really involved in Homeless Coalition and SPOSIS, as well as being a member of LAHSA's Lived Experience Advisory Board. And I understood by way of the Board of Supervisors meetings, the many conversations around Measure H, 888, what's happening with the city, and then also with an LA County, it's a joint powers of authority by way of the city of Los Angeles County. And I became very much interested in understanding how can I participate to really understand, to be informed in order to inform. So the LACOC membership process is by way of community endorsements. And so I applied as a member at large. I was endorsed by SPOSIX Homeless Lead Agency Director, Veronica Lewis with Hopkins, Shannon Murray, the Director of WLCAC, and Linda Kelly, the Director of Fathers and Mothers Who Care, and strongly supported by Janet Kelly, the Director of Sanctuary Hope, as a person with lived experience who is actively involved in my community, and a member of the SPOSIX Homeschools, volunteering with faith-based organizations and ensuring that people who are unhoused in our community are recognized, and spending time in encampments to really understand the current climate that we are in. Also, I am an appointed commissioner in a supervisorial district as in mental health. So it's really important for me to clearly be present and involved as a voice of lived experience. But what's interesting about being a part of the continuum of care is recognizing how uninformed or ill-informed we are as people with lived experience, and how huge this really is. It's overwhelming at times with the information in which we have. So I'm super excited to share more about what that experience is and what I believe needs to change. So again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Reba. And that last comment, I think, is a really good bridge to the next question I wanted to ask, which was about information. Each of you being on Continuums of Care board know just how sort of data-driven, how oriented toward metrics the homeless systems are across the country. We see it at the Alliance as well. This is a national crisis that is measured in so many ways, with on sort of an individual level with HMIS, with the annual point in time count. There's a lot of data that is then used by providers, by continuums, to make decisions. The question, though, related to that, I wanted to ask then, and I got help from you, Reba, on this question, which I think the way you worded it is exactly the point that I want us to dive into, is how can continuums of care, so I'm going to read this, be held accountable to ensure that they are blending both data and the actual experiences of people with lived experience to shift and modify policies and design programs and decide about how resources are allocated. Too often, I think we're relying more on the data than we are on the experiences and expertise of people with lived experience. So let me go to you first, Bill, if you have any thoughts on that question of how do you, what's your advice to continuums of care and providers in combining data with firsthand experience?
I think we need to try to get more people involved with the meetings, and also have them participate not just in the monthly COC meetings, but participate as parts of the committee meetings. And we need to bring on people not as tokens, but as compensated individuals for participation based on the amount that they do participate. That's one thing the National Alliance does very well, and the COCs need to function as well. We need to have people with all the very different parts of different experiences. You know, some people are, you know, as a man, I had one experience, but as a family, it would be different. As someone that has domestic violence issues, it's another different. And for the adolescents, it's different as well. So we need to have all of those voices involved in the COC process. One thing that I participate here in Maine is the Notice of Funding Opportunity Group that I'm actually part that fills out the NOFO every year. And we even have a committee that meets monthly trying to prepare for the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Suzette, do you have thoughts on you sitting on the COC board, get reams of reports and data and printouts and so forth? How do you combine that with what people have actually gone through? Well,
absolutely. One thing I'll say is that, you know, I've mentioned to Jessica Reed and Chris Freed. Chris Freed is our chair of the Continuum of Care board, and Jessica is our liaison from LAHSA, our expertise, and as well as Ryan. Ryan, I want to give him the Ryan Macy, I believe his last name is. But anyway, but what I've said to them is that I feel as you know, the NOFA process is going along. It would be incumbent upon them. It would really be great if somehow we, especially as the lived experienced people who are on the COC board, if we maybe got to have some hands-on experience with some of the entities and nonprofits who are part of the board. So as they are working through their NOFA process, perhaps we could be brought in you know, and really have a physical hands-on. So there's some real application, real life application to that process for us. so that when we are helping to make decisions on the NOFA process, then we have some tangible experience to be able to offer to that as well. And like Reba said, there is a great deal of information. It's very all consuming when you really come into this and you don't have the expertise from the nonprofits, that really have worked together for years and years and years on these NOFA processes and so forth. The other thing that I would say, as grants are being chosen by entities, I feel that those of us with lived expertise should be brought in to really help select grants, write grants, decide how then grants should be dispersed, and so we should be we should be part of the process from the very beginning all the way through the process, not just brought on after the fact. And as Bill has stated, where we're kind of like a token after the fact. And no, we should really be part of the overall conversation from the jump street. And I'll give you one example why this is important. When I first came to Skid Row almost a decade ago now, I was brought here from a women's safe house by John Kelly, who was then working for LA Mission. And what they were finding is that it would take 2 to 3 days to find a bed for a man. And that same bed for a woman would take a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks. And so we as women were being put on the backside of men's programs. And I was put on the backside of a men's veterans program. And the dudes would let us know, our dollars run this up in here. And my point in saying that is that most of us women were fleeing domestic violence situations, precarious living situations, and literally had no other place to go. Now, the fact that Black middle-aged elderly women we track as a #1 demographic displaced into poverty and homelessness decade after decade by huge disproportionate numbers, there is a cognitive dissonance to really understanding then that there's an intersectionality of why that is the case. There's a perpetual cognitive dissonance that's really not being engaged. And therefore, those of us with lived experience should be brought into that engagement and allowed to then make decisions on how dollars should be allocated to support us in those needs and empower us. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzette. I'm going to just go to one quick question that I saw in the chat as you were remarking about Skid Row, which is such an important community to understand for those working on homelessness. But if you're not from the West Coast, you may not be aware. So Skid Row is in downtown Los Angeles. It is 54 square blocks of tents and tarps and thousands of human beings living in a very compact area of LA on the sidewalk. It's the largest human encampment north of the Mexican border. So thank you for representing Skid Row, but I did want to clarify. So it's an actual place, not simply a reference to people who are living out of doors. Chris, I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about data and lived experience and how your continuums of care make use of both?
Yes. One great thing we do, it's not in the grant level, but it is something more than just individuals weighing in on things. We do a client feedback sessions with different agencies and programs within at least before COVID. It's been a little bit more daunting now, where we would go physically to an agency and then we would actually ask the agency to invite people from that program. Sometimes it was multiple programs. And then they would come and speak regarding, we'd ask them, what is the agency doing for you? What are your needs being met? Are there things that you would like to ask for, but you don't know how? Are there things that you have discouragements with? Is there housing requests that you aren't going where you would like them to go? Are you getting help with transportation and all those other things that you need? And then we would, it first started out where we were working with a collaborative applicant and they were doing most of the work. But we were kind of going there and then engaging, and then sometimes going back if some work needed to be done somewhere, some changes that needed to happen. But then along the way, we got better trained and we were actually engaging directly with the agency ourselves. and then writing the reports ourselves. And then that way, and then working in the communication loop to make sure if there were things that needed to be worked on, or if there were things that were working well, or there were just suggestions that maybe there's things that could be done. And so I thought that worked pretty well. It is a bit of a bandwidth issue on how many you can get done in 1 year. We were hopeful that our youth action board was going to be moving on such things, but I'm not sure the progress of that at this point within our Chicago Continuum of Care. And I do want to tell you though, when it comes to, we had a data dashboard where we're able to look up at certain key indicators that our board wants us to keep track of. Like, for example, if how long it's taking somebody to get housed, are people falling back into homelessness, things like that. And then you're able to then see, it gets reviewed every so often, either within a committee, and then it gets lifted up to the board. Another key thing I want to throw out there in our Suburban Cook COC is they actually have YDHP funding, which is Youth Homeless Demonstration funding for a rural community. And so this year they actually have a point in time count that will happen in the summer, not just the one that happens in January every year. Because in the last couple of years, something that's really been a disconnect in the point in time count is a lot of businesses are not, that were 24 hours before, 24/7, are not now. And it's harder to find some of the people that are on the street, because after a certain time of night, if you can't find them out and about in certain places, it becomes you have to be either have your point in time count start sooner, or talk to the people or at some businesses and find out where they see people that are still actively out on the street. That's something that when I was out in Skokie this year, we were at a Walmart that was going to close at 11. And I talked to the customer service people because I figured people got to cash their checks there, or maybe they have to, get other services that you wouldn't necessarily, a cashier wouldn't know about. He was able to give us 3 or 4 other locations based on some people that come in there and where they could be found, which if we hadn't talked to her, we might have missed.
Yeah.
And so I think those are some key takeaways. And then you share that, and then hopefully you start keep good data on those things, and then you're able to build a better methodology for the next iteration.
Thanks, Chris. Reba, I'd love your insights as well on this topic, and thank you for framing that question. So, what do you feel COC should be doing better in this area?
For starters, we have to first be valued, the voices of lived experience, and empowered to speak in our authentic voice and experiences. And this is absolutely necessary and extremely important to ending and preventing homelessness. For many of us know firsthand what works, what doesn't work, and why. And additionally, we must be treated with dignity and respect when addressing policies, programs, designs, or how resources are allocated. Personally, I believe that we have to be in partnership with our homeless providers engaged in the current state of homelessness in our community or county to prevent it in the homelessness that folks are experiencing. When the COC boards completes its process, we don't have the final word. It's LAHSA's commission has the approval power, not the COC body. So I think that what's really important for me is that even the most well-intended, well-rounded, equity-minded policies and programs will be deprived if they do not bring together lived experts to control. And particularly, we make decisions about homeless service and policies and programs. It is crucial, and I mean critical, for us to be, or for the agencies or entities to be purposefully and meaningfully including the perspectives of those with expertise. We have a large number of Black men who are unhoused in the county of Los Angeles. And it's shameful that we don't have the voice of Black men at the COC table. And I'm going to set that aside for a moment, but I think that it's really critical that when we are looking at a diversity, that we really are mirroring what is actually going on in our community. So we have unique insights, lived experience through the many factors that contribute to homelessness, and also solutions that are equitable and effective. I believe people with lived expertise should be included in all phases of the policy and programming, from inception and design to implementation, evaluation, and allocation of funding. This is a challenge for the homeless services system and our COC.
I think that last point you made is was exactly right, but also a topic I'd love for us to talk about in our next question, which is about tokenism. So Bill and Suzette both use that word in your last comments. So often, and I will own this for the Alliance, I've worked for other national organizations in the homelessness sector, I've worked for local organizations. There is a problem with tokenism when it involves engaging people with lived experience in the organization. And I think certainly all of the organizations that are advocating for good policies want to do better and could really use your advice on this, that as powerful as stories are, very often the roles of people with lived experience is limited to kind of telling their story, or sometimes it's I'm a beneficiary of this program, so the person who runs the program is going to bring a program participant to a meeting with a funder or a policymaker to say, essentially, here's our success story. Here's someone who can tell you about why what we do is good. We, I think, on this in this conversation, want to build on that, but get beyond that so that people with lived experience are actually involved in, Reba, as you said, the full spectrum of what's getting decided. So as easy as it is to critique and to point out there's a lot of tokenism in the homelessness sector, I'd love to get any advice you would have for organizations that want to do better. What's one or two things that an organization that truly wants the perspective, the guidance, the leadership to be accountable to people with lived expertise, what should they be trying to do? How should they be restructuring the way they make decisions to involve folks who know homelessness themselves? Bill, I don't know if you have a thought on this. We'll go around one more time.
Yeah, I think we need to add lived experience participation as an evaluation criteria when we're monitoring projects that are granted the funds from the COCs. Tell the grantees that this is something we're going to be looking at as time goes on, and have them work to try to invite people that they're serving to evaluate how they're doing and the work that that's done. Providing that input to individuals helps to focus their efforts. Thank you.
That's a great point. Suzette, do you have a sort of pointed, specific thing that you think organizations should be doing on this?
Jerry, I've written poetry about this stuff. That's how triggered I am by it. Like, it's just, oh my God. First of all, don't ask me to sell you my story. Don't think you have a right to my story. That's one thing. That's the, our story is our story. That's the one thing that we have. That's one thing I've said over the years is the fact of, I came to LA 10 years ago with no more than a duffel bag at Union Station the morning of August 1st, 2012. A duffel bag. I've had to make a way out of no way. You don't get to have a right to my story. Don't try and own me by taking my story and making it your own. That's just huge to me. And also, I would say that, again, like, empower us. Like, here's the deal, because this is what people don't get, is that our healing stage begins when you are supporting us by, one, meeting us where we're at, and also empowering us to build upon our lives, build upon ourselves, be part of the solution, and not just, your client. No, we're your colleague. We are not your client. We are your colleague. And therefore, we should have a seat at the table comparable to yours. And that's how we can no longer talk about equality and empowerment while continuing to enforce inequities. It's literally how I came up with that phrase in 2015, because I'm sitting on a national platform with folks who big wigs, and we as folks with lived experience, who the three of us who were appointed from the community, we got a sandwich. We were lucky if we got a bus token. I had to advocate for the fact that we should be getting compensated. And then at that point, they gave us, a $20 target every 3 months. So, and by the way, I'm walking around with the Section 8 voucher for almost 9 months, mind you, 9 months, and couldn't get any help. So I almost lost that voucher. And Jerry, you know this all too well. So anyway, with that said, I just really feel like it's imperative that they see us first as their colleague, while understanding that they need to meet us where we're at, and really helping us to empowering us in the way of okay, we'll get more into the whole compensation thing, hopefully, before we get going. But I'll just leave it there for now.
Great points. Great points, Suzette. Chris, what specific advice you'd give to a continuum of care on this point of not thinking of, not slipping into tokenism, but genuine partnership and involvement?
Well, I think it goes into the idea that we all sometimes, especially in virtual meetings, are not all going to be on camera in a quiet room to where it's easy to be seen. You raise your hand and always be the first called on, because I've seen that happen in meetings. And yet somebody's got their virtual hand raised or been on the chat and said, "Hey, can I speak?" And somebody running the slides isn't paying no attention to it. I get it that sometimes it's a little overwhelming to do, but sometimes it happens too often to where it's got to be more than just my bad. It's almost like a pattern of practice. And then what happens is then you get the people that are more willing to speak, they'll dominate a meeting, and others will be like, "Well, why was I there? Did someone even read the chat?" Because no one's really even commenting. And I know what it's like to be on meetings like that. And I know that some are really passionate about what they do, but sometimes they're also the most involved in the meetings that are happening, and they're meeting with the people that have the more of the funds, and they're already behind closed doors, so their voice has already been heard. So but they're like a lobbyist and shut it down. And so if everyone's in that meeting, they should all have a chance to speak at the very least, because there's awkward silences along the way, or even if you're not verbally being said, a way to actually keep everybody's input and keep them engaged. Email them later on, or, "Hey, we haven't heard from this group in a while. Do you guys have anything you want to say?" Especially if we've got somebody calling in that doesn't want to feel like, they don't want to be rude, they don't want to interrupt, but at the same time they're not sure when they can actually speak up. Because you've been in-person meetings can be very similar to that too, especially the bigger, the more people you get in one room. So I think it's about making sure people are more than just window dressing, a chance that they not only have, a chance to share their story, but a chance to make recommendations for change for policy before it becomes a policy they just react to. Because then it's easy to say, "Well, we spoke to them," or "They were invited." I find government often does that. And so that's one thing we have to really be careful within our COCs, is sometimes government's heavily involved, and they're sometimes heavily involved on the board level and the committees that derive from the board. They already had their chances to do things, but they have to this is really your continuum. They shouldn't be dictating everything you're doing, because you're not holding them to any sort of standard to push the envelope to do more than they want to do, which is why you have a lot of people get reelected, because if you don't push them, they don't hear anything really new that they have to do. They'll do the bare minimum and they get reelected and stick around for 6 terms.
Yeah.
If there's no term limits.
Chris, I want to lift up that point you just made, and Reba, if you have thoughts on this to maybe chime in, but Chris, the point you made was also a way I think we've all seen the tokenism play out, is you're asked to provide input, but it's at a late stage in the process where so much has already been decided. Reba, do you have specific advice for continuums and providers on how to be better?
Well, certainly, and I think we could really start with relationship and partnership. Who are the people that are being invited to the table? How are we getting there? How do we arrive? And we're not arriving in Los Angeles by way of the providers who are providing the services in the community. We're talking about the continuum of care, which covers the whole, all of LA County, minus Long Beach, Pasadena, and Glendale. But when I think about being involved, I think that the selection or the endorsement come from the community as to who should be representing in our community. And I say that because when we talk about tokenism, it's oftentimes a selection from an entity, right? So what do you want? Do you really want the truth about the decisions that are being made? Are you positioning me to be educated and informed and well equipped to actually be able to inform decisions? I think not. But I wrote something down as I was listening, and I want to thank everyone who spoke before me in reference to this question. But I think that it's important to also acknowledge that tokenism robs us of our authentic voices and our authentic experiences in which we are being invited to the table for to begin with. So that's partnership, more involvement from the community in the selection process as to who, in order to make certain that we're empowered and supported and understanding what is actually happening in the communities in which we reside or which we are representing.
Yeah. Thank you, Reba. Before we move off this point, I think, Bill, you have one more reflection, and then we're going to get into sort of a lightning round of trying to get through as many of thank you all who are contributing questions from the audience. We're going to try to get to as many of those in the time remaining we have. Bill, did you have one last thought on tokenism?
Just one thing is when you're having meetings, don't use acronyms. Work to try to share information completely, not speak NOFO speak, not speak COC speak, but speak actual language. Thank you.
And that actually, we're thinking along the same lines. That's one of the questions that I wanted to lift up from the Q&A. So there was a question about information, access to information. Not just people with lived experience, but anyone who's on a COC board is sort of overwhelmed with a lot of reading material, a lot of documents and memos at every meeting. So I don't think we have time for each of you to respond to all the questions, although another question we're getting a lot of, we've gotten multiple questions about compensation. So I want to get all of your perspectives on that when we get to that question. But here's a different question. Do any of the four of you have thoughts on, how do COCs best convey information to people with lived experience who are on their boards or in their lived experience advisory groups that's useful for you, and also you're not being like swamped with the details when the real big decisions are hard to identify? That sometimes it's like the big decisions aren't what you're getting overwhelmed with information about, but you're being asked to read so many memos about the details of things that have a lot of acronyms and so forth. So any advice to continuums of care and providers on what's a useful amount of information, the right kind of information for you to provide feedback on decisions? Any takers?
I don't know if this really answers your point, but this comes to mind because this is something that happened this morning. So I had to go to California Endowment this morning. As I was waiting for the bus, I saw a young lady that I could tell was new to the community. And men kept swarming around a really nice sporty Mercedes, stops a block away and then circles back to her and all this kind of stuff. And then long story short, as I then come back home and I stop at CVS and I take the bus back, she's there on a different corner. And she's got these men swarming around her. There's a man in front of her and she looks over him and sees me and I wave to her. She waves back at me, really young lady. And I say to her, do you know where to go to get services around here? And I said, go to Downtown Women's Center just to make sure, as she nods her head. And then I say to her, Do you have someplace to stay? Now I'm noticing that the man is whispering her to tell her to tell me yes. But as he would turn his head away, she would shake her head like, no, she doesn't have any place. So the bus comes down. I put all my groceries on the bus. And then I asked the bus driver, can I go and give her my card? He gives me the time to go back and give her my card. And I give her my card. I run, give her my card. And I said, here, contact me if you need to. Don't let these men pimp you out here. Why is this important? Because as LAHSA and all the other boards that have people with lived experience on it, I think this is part of the cognitive dissonance of understanding how women get sex trafficked out here. Women become commodified and referred to as a tent wife and so forth, and by the men out here. And I feel that it's imperative that we have a voice at these various tables that are represented. As we talk about, Reba says, well, the men aren't being represented. Well, you know what, doggone it, the women in Skid Row should be represented on the Lived Experience Advisory Board. And then when we're represented, there should be space for understanding that the journey here in Skid Row may be completely different from what other people are dealing with in other communities. And then make space for us to be able to share so that young ladies like this don't become old ladies decades later and not getting the resources and services that they need when they first end up here in Skid Row, because these men have told me over the years, we know when there's new meat in the community. They have told me this. Yeah. This is part of the issue of the cognitive dissonance that's happening. I don't know if I answered your question, but I wanted to make sure I got that in there. Thank you.
I'm very glad you raised that issue, Suzette. And there are analogies as well with looking out for one another, which is one way that we build power with people who are participating in decisions, people who are new to the discussion, folks who have been there. I know you were making a much more important point about that woman's plight, but thank you so much for sharing that. Let me move to the big question, because we're going to be running short on time. We have gotten several, maybe several dozen questions at this point from the chat and the Q&A about compensation, that people with lived experience who are being asked to provide input, to attend meetings, to be involved, deserve to be compensated for their time, just like the paid staff who are doing that asking. So I'd love to get each of your perspectives, but please be succinct and brief, because we may be able to squeeze in a few more questions after your answers to this. But Bill, why don't we start with you? What should continuums of care and providers be doing on compensation?
First set up an advisory committee, and then have that committee track participation based on the number of meetings people go to, and then compensate them, on a per hour basis or per meeting basis for the monthly participation, and find a way and provide that participation how they want it. It could not to affect their other benefits that they actually have. We don't want to have someone else take money away from them. Thank you.
And again, we just have a few minutes. Suzette, what's your best advice on compensation issues to providers and continuums? Oh, you're there. You
I'm
are.
making a mess of things. Okay. So compensation has to really be understood that again, meeting us where we're at. So yes, compensation is extremely important because it's part of the narrative. You can't talk about homelessness and inflation and talk about other communities and other demographics and not consider the needs of the homeless population, especially given in our homeless communities. We tend to pay so much more just to try and to live and survive. So with that said, like, God dang it, quit 1099ing me to death, because I'm living on $500 a month now. Do you understand? I am living on $500 a month now. So if we're talking about compensation and empowering people, okay, then we need to freaking turn this around. There has to be changes. And the changes start from the very top, on the federal level, on the state level. Quit penalizing us, empower us, quit penalizing us. Support us in meeting us where we're at. Find means to help us be empowered. We've got to shift this narrative. We've got to change the way Social Security, disability, and all of that is looked at. It's got to be changed from the very top. It's got to be changed from the very top. And I say we start that today. We start that conversation today.
Thank you, Suzette. Chris, do you have thoughts on compensation and how it could be done better?
Yeah, I really like the idea of being flexible in how you pay that compensation, because depending on where you're getting your benefits from, or especially if you live in a housing authority unit, they're gonna track almost anything they can track. It's almost like you owed money, you made a bet like in a game somewhere. And they were like, "Hey, you owe us $10, now it's 20." But I think it's just making sure that people are not being penalized for being involved in things. And if, for example, also if you're going to, try to help people out per meeting, if somebody's doing something that's 4 to 6 to 8 hours long in a day, it's got to be more than just $20 to $30. I mean, you got to think about everybody else that's in the room. Usually, even if it's indirect time, they're making far more than that. And I'm not saying anyone goes into this to make, you get rich, but at the same time, you shouldn't have such class disparity when it becomes between involvement, because almost everyone else is making quite comfortable living in nonprofits. I mean, there are your lowercase workers that are making not as much money, but at the same time, it's another thing. I think you could get people more of lived experience hired in some of these positions that stay vacant now, because a lot of these jobs are open, if they would be easier about how they didn't need a master's degree to get this particular job before they can actually do it, even though that lived experience person might be better qualified than anyone who walked into the door that was green behind their ears. Thank you.
Amen. Reba, you get the last word on this point.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm not going to repeat what I've heard, but Chris made me think about something. I think that it's really important that we are looked upon as consultants, that we have something that's very unique and very powerful, if you will, because I would ask that anyone who has not experienced what we've experienced to go and sleep outside for a few days, without your wallet and without your raincoat. That's one, but I also think that it's really important to take a look at how does this affect the research that happens. So when researchers are reaching out to us, they have to maneuver, and it becomes very uncomfortable for many people who are seeking the authentic voices of people with lived experience when they are challenged by this compensation and what's hanging over many folks' heads as a result of their housing subsidies or whatever type of government assistance, if that be the case. But when Chris made mention about working or jobs or hiring into the system, I think it's also important that if we're going to take that route, that we are allowing people to be hired because of their lived expertise, and that they don't have to lose their authentic voices or experiences, or be, open to provide input based on what they have experienced, because they're now wearing your badge. And so I think that it's a delicate thing, but the 1099 is hurting a lot of people. And, there's an old saying, I don't know about y'all, but, you kind of get what you pay for. And so what is it that you really want? Do you want people to be comfortable and relaxed? So I think that we have to create a movement and really advocate at higher levels. And even if we start at our local level, in order to get the support of our local government, in order to support us at the state and federal level. So I think there's a whole lot to be said about that. I'd love to provide you with a lot of more input that I have on this particular piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I can't believe we've run through our entire 60 minutes, but those final points were so important to end on, that we are not going to be able to have an impact on homelessness by in isolation, but rather in solidarity and listening and partnering and taking leadership from those who have grappled with homelessness firsthand. And so this has been a wonderful discussion. I wish we could go on for another hour. I want to thank all four of our panelists, and I want to thank the audience as well. Look for this material on our website, and we hope to see all of you again on a future event. Thank you again.